Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Shape of Despair, Return to the Void, out February 25th on Season of Mist. This album has 6 tracks, 57 minutes in length, and this is the band's 6th full-length studio album. They are a Finnish funeral doom metal band. Now this is a record that moves extremely slowly. It actually moves more downwards than forwards. You sink into this album with every passing second, every passing minute, every passing song. The little movement that exists going forward, it's coming from the sense of continuity, the seamless sense of continuity that exists from track to track. Very hard to tell where one song ends and where the next one starts. At the end of the experience, you almost feel like you were just listening to one single song from start to finish, with perhaps 6 different chapters that kind of break that movement. Now this, at first glance, would make you feel like this album has great mobility, that it moves really well, that it transports the listener. It doesn't really transport you because you're still sinking into it, and because of that it becomes very hard to digest, very hard to appreciate, at least at first glance. You have to give it time, you have to work through it. It needs a few plays. Once you move into the soundscape, this album has nuances in the sound, and those nuances in the sound impact the nuances that exist within the atmosphere. But once again, at first glance, when you're first listening to it, impossible to tell the forest from the trees. Everything feels, sounds, the experience is exactly the same. You have to understand what makes this album similar from track to track, and then try to put those things aside in order for you to discover the uniquenesses that exist within each and every single song. Once you're able to digest that portion of the record, that style of sound, this style of approach, the album becomes a little bit more clear. You're still within the darkness, you're still within the void, you're still surrounded by this fog of sound and atmosphere, but at least you're feeling a little bit more at ease, and you're feeling a little bit more welcome into it. Another element that really welcomes you into that experience is the fact that the sound doesn't have shapes. It doesn't have borders, it doesn't have limits. When you listen to this record, it almost feels like the sound is traveling through empty space. It's just going where it needs to go, and there's nothing to bounce off. Makes the record feel a lot bigger without having to increase the volume, without having to increase the substance within that volume, or even without having to make the album super heavy. The heaviness that exists is in the atmosphere that it carries and how it makes you feel. That's where the heaviness lies. But having the album have this sense of spreading its footprint across each and every single song without having borders or limits of where that footprint ends, really important in order for this album to have the impact that it has. An album that stays very consistent sound-wise as far as drums and bass are concerned. What you get at the beginning is going to be what you're going to get all the way through. They're grounding the record, creating a little bit of the foundation, but then you see the guitars, and you find that the guitars are giving you perhaps a little bit of light in an album that's surrounded by just emptiness. And that's important because it brings melody, it brings melancholy, it brings a sense of togetherness. It moves, it starts to define a little bit how you're going to hold on to these tracks and how you're going to try to find your way out of that hole that you've been digging yourself into. So very important attribute, a very important element throughout the entire experience of listening to this record. Now when it comes down to the vocals, Henry and Natalie are phenomenal. The yin and the yang. This album is all about that kind of approach. The two understand exactly what they can do in order to make the songs as interesting as possible, as engaging as possible. Every time I was listening to a song and I felt like one was a little bit overstaying its welcome and I needed something from the other, that's exactly what I got. So the perfection of using these two vocalists throughout the entire album really shines a bright light in the overall record construction and in the vocal tracks across all 6 songs. They have this balance to them that work really well. Henry brings the darkness. When you're digging yourself into this album, when you're sinking into this record, he is that darkness at the end, that bottomless pit. He represents that. Her voice represents the sense of feeling welcome in that surrounding. You don't feel boxed in. She makes you feel comfortable. So having these two attributes is fundamental for this record. Overall, this is an album that I still find very hard to digest. It takes a lot of plays for you to start to really see what this album is all about. But it doesn't matter how many times you listen through it, the experience is always one that's difficult. To sit down and go from the first all the way to the last song. 57 minutes of a very similar approach, a very similar experience. At times it could be a little bit too much. It overburdens the listener. This is an album that's a lot easier to digest if you remove the songs from its context and you just listen to a song here and a song there. Then you can dive a little bit deeper. You can appreciate it a little bit better, and you have a sense of reset at the end of that experience, because the album as it sits, there's no reset possible until you reach the end of it. As far as favorite songs are concerned, I want to start off with Return to the Void. This is the opening track on the album, and it builds in a little bit. It starts slowly, it builds in, it has this melancholic guitar sound that defines the track itself. It becomes the backdrop of the song. Then you have the harsh vocals that are welcoming you into that void. There are the void. They really feel like a black hole within the song itself. Then Natalie's vocals come in, and you start to see some light, or at least a sense of feeling a little bit more comfortable within that void. And they came in at the right time. I'm listening to this song and I'm like, wow man, I could really use a little bit of a change here vocally, because sound wise the track is very balanced. And that's exactly when she comes in. It's almost like she read my mind. The song construction from a vocal approach is phenomenal. You get what you need at exact the right time in the right amounts. She is a life jacket that comes in and saves you from drowning further and further into this track. Now next we have Solitary Downfall, a song that has opening feedback from the guitars, and this feedback is a trait that came from the ending of the previous song. So as the previous song ends with a guitar feedback, that feedback goes into this track and becomes the opening of the song itself. This sense of continuity, you're going to see it throughout the entire record, and is really well illustrated in the opening of Solitary Downfall. A track that feels like a very slow, methodic walk. Very slow. You're taking one step every 3-5 minutes. You just feel like sometimes you're more standing still than you are even moving. Musically, the track builds definitely a path. You see the path in front of you. I'm not necessarily sure if you're walking on it, but you're seeing it. The vocals are very layered on this track, and it adds texture, it adds experience to the overall song, and it helps define a little bit better what this track is going to be all about. The experience is very mellow. It's a very soft, mellow track. The vocals ensure that that softness really exists and stays consistent almost all the way throughout the entire song. And then you have these harsh vocals that get sprinkled at the end that add a little bit of energy to a track that just felt like it was absolutely draining you with every passing second. Last but not least, you have the Inner Desolation. The guitar sound is phenomenal on this song. It really is. It feels like it's expanding at times, and you never really see the end of where that guitar sound is going to come to. It just keeps growing, expanding. The song just feels really big without necessarily having huge volume or even heaviness. It pulls a little bit of an emotional drive. This song definitely has an emotional backdrop in it. That emotional backdrop exists in the soundscape, in the atmosphere that's impacted by that soundscape, but also in the overall vocal approach, making the song feel a little bit more engaging, using all the tools at their disposal in one single track. The song that I felt was the most dynamic perhaps. All the other tracks on the album have a very straightforward, balanced approach from start to finish. This one throws a few curveballs. There are a little bit more of a up and down, ebbs and flows, ripple effect in terms of what the soundscape is doing and how the vocals are interacting with it. So definitely a track that feels like it doesn't have necessarily a pattern, but definitely grows from start to finish. This is it. Shape of Despair, Return to the Void, of February 25th on Season of Mist. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.